Good evening. For tonight's video, I would like to present a court case between two watchmakers, and this is very interesting. Now, I had promised to make this video. I was doing a video on the difference between Louis Montandon and L. Montandon Locle and Louis Montandon Geneva. Now, I had promised to make this video because I feel that this is quite interesting, that we see how these watchmakers are interacting and a little bit of what happens. And we find this interesting court case, and a lot of information is received as a result of this. We see a little bit how the business goes. So let us proceed. I would like to read the information from the court, and I would like to make notations afterwards. I hope this is useful and perhaps a fascinating detour into the world of the late 1860s in the small Swiss city of Chaux de Fonds, and a little bit of this background. But let us begin. So this is April 7th, 1869, and we have this court case, Julien Perret. He is the appellant, and Louis Montandon is the respondent. And this is a case in which citizen Julien Perret is appealing a judgment that was rendered in Chaux de Fonds on February 23rd of 1869. And this was with citizen Louis Montandon as the respondent. Contents of the judgment rendered by the Court of First Instance. The court, having examined the procedure conducted between citizens Julien Perret on the one hand and Louis Montandon on the other hand, regarding the claim of the former, which concludes that citizen Montandon should be compelled to acknowledge that a joint inventory and final general division of the partnership, which lasted from May to October 31st, 1868, must take place. That's the first point. The second, that consequently, he must produce and submit all books, records, documents, and materials common to both parties and related to the partnership's operations. That he must pay the costs and expenses of this action. Having considered the pleas of inadmissibility raised against the claim, which are summarized as follows. On November 1st, 1868, a general settlement of accounts occurred between the parties, according to which Julien Perret was allocated as his share of the profits a sum of 777 francs and 86 cents. Considering that to prove his pleas of inadmissibility, citizen Montandon submitted an excerpt from the invoice book for watches manufactured, a letter from Julien Perret, a notebook procured by Julien Perret, an excerpt from the work ledgers of Louis Montandon, a receipt dated November 1st, 1868 for 549.10 francs, signed by Louis Montandon and submitted by Julien Perret. Considering that Julien Perret introduced exceptions to demonstrate that there had been no receipt or general settlement of accounts between the parties, considering that the various accounts and notes submitted in the proceedings suggest at the very least that there was a provisional settlement of accounts between the parties, as evidenced by the letters of citizen Julien Perret dated November 12th and 13th, as well as receipt of Louis Montandon dated November 1st of the same month. Considering furthermore that from the letter of Julien Perret dated November 2nd, 1868, subsequent to the receipt and the two letters mentioned above, there is written evidence suggesting that a definitive agreement was reached between the parties. In this letter, citizen Perret states, according to the agreement made between us, I still have to receive upon payment, of course, 7 dozen movements that were in assembly when we parted. These 7 dozen do not include the 4 cartons numbered 19, 21, 23, and 24, for which I have the barrels, and for which the assembly will be credited when I receive them. Considering that while the precise terms of this letter do not constitute sufficient proof of the alleged fact in the pleas of inadmissibility, they at least provide initial evidence that citizen Louis Montandon can be called upon to supplement through an oath taken ex officio. In view of Articles 1114 and 1117 of the Civil Code, for these reasons, ruling in the first instance defers to citizen Louis Montandon an ex officio oath, and on the following question, on November 1st, 1868, did a contradictory and definitive statement of accounts take place between you and Julien Perret, following which it was recognized that the profits allocated to Julien Perret amounted to 777.86 francs, and was this settlement accepted by Julien Perret without objection on his part? April 8th, now 1869, the decision. Having reviewed the proceedings conducted before the Civil Court of Chaux de Fonds between citizen Julien Perret, plaintiff, on the one hand, and citizen Louis Montandon, defendant, on the other hand, having reviewed the judgment rendered in the first instance, which defers to citizen Louis Montandon, an ex officio oath on the aforementioned question, having considered the appeal lodged against this interlocutory judgment by citizen Julien Perret, the Court of Appeal delivers the following. Considers that on December 15th, 1868, citizen Julien Perret, a watchmaker in Chaux de Fonds, filed a claim against citizen Louis Montandon, also a watchmaker, in the same location, seeking to compel him to acknowledge that a joint inventory and final general division of the partnership, which lasted from May to October 31st, 1868, must take place, that consequently he must produce and submit all books, records, documents, and materials common to both parties and related to the partnership's operations, that he must pay the costs of this action, that citizen Louis Montandon responded to this claim with pleas of inadmissibility, asserting that a general settlement of accounts had occurred on November the 1st, 1868, which allocated a sum of 711.12 francs to Julien Perret for his share of the profits, and that Perret accepted this settlement without objection. For these reasons, the court confirms the judgment rendered while correcting a numerical error in the statement of the oath, replacing the amount of 777.86 francs with 711.12 francs. This orders the appellant to pay the costs fixed at 116.80 francs. A summary of the case. This case involved a dispute between Julien Perret and Louis Montandon, both watchmakers of Chaux de Fonds, concerning the dissolution of their partnership, which lasted from May to October 31st, 1868. Perret claims that in his claims he sought to compel Montandon to participate in a joint inventory and a final division of the partnership assets. He demanded Montandon produce all shared books, documents, records relating to this partnership's operations. He requested Montandon be held responsible for the costs of the action, the legal costs. Montandon's defense, Montandon argued that a general settlement of accounts had already taken place on November 1st, 1868, where Perret was allocated 711.12 francs as his share of the profits. He provided evidence including records, letters, and receipts to support his claims. The court proceedings and outcome. The court of first instance deferred the matter to Montandon for an oath to confirm whether a definitive settlement had occurred. Perret appealed, challenging the evidence and claiming no final agreement had been made. The Court of Appeal made the following decision. The appellate court upheld the original judgment, affirming that there was a sufficient preliminary evidence of a settlement. However, the court corrected a numerical error in the original judgment, clarifying that the agreed upon amount was 711.12 francs, not 777.86 francs. The final judgment, Montandon was required to take an oath to confirm the settlement's validity. Perret was ordered to pay the legal costs, totaling 116.80 francs. And the key outcome, the court leaned towards accepting that a provisional or definitive settlement had occurred between the parties, heavily based on the evidence Montandon provided and Perret's own records. Montandon's position was upheld, leaving Perret responsible for the court costs. This is very interesting, these very legalistic proceedings. We are understanding that some sort of a society was established between the two, which lasted between May to October, till the end of October, so approximately half a year. And this is when the production of these watches occurred. Now, this partnership, it must be interesting. There may be papers still in existence in the Chaux de Fonds records documenting the name of this partnership. Perhaps it was only Perret and Montandon or something of this variety. It very possibly could have been Montandon and Co. This is not clear, but we have we see what sort of demands are made, what sort of the fact that they were able to look in the workbooks, and there was definitely an inclination as to what was happening in this partnership. And we also have a very interesting material record about the number of cases of watch movements. This was interesting. 7 dozen movements that were in assembly when they parted, and there were these cartons that were filled with movements without barrels, apparently. So once again, we can get an idea about a little bit about the amount of production that we're seeing here at the tail end of this. And it's very possible to make some sort of a judgment on what sort of production amounts that this partnership could have produced. That this certainly would have been in the hundreds of timepieces made during this half year. But very fascinating. And we are left to ponder upon these characters of about whom are we speaking. Now we know that Louis Montandon is this Louis Auguste Montandon, who lived from 1806 to 1880, and he was resident of Chaux de Fonds. Now he was originally from the south in the Traverse Valley. However, he lived and worked in Chaux de Fonds, and he became quite wealthy, and I believe was even an appellate judge himself at one point. Now, Julien Perret is much more difficult character to track. There are several possible candidates for this individual, and there is interesting notes. In fact, a Julien Perret, who was a fabricant de horlogerie in Chaux de Fonds, did take prizes in 1848 at Bern, a local expedition in Switzerland, and at the Paris 1855 exhibition. And these were 4 rather nice chronometers, very sophisticated. So if this is the same individual, and it does seem like it is, then there was certainly he would have been technically able to fulfill such orders, or he was on the level that he could produce clearly. This is most likely him. Now, Louis Montandon is mentioned in Devoin under Négociants et Fabricants de Horlogerie, and his listed during this period under his own name, and he was at, I believe, by this time, Saint Pierre number 20. But there's no mention in Devoin of this partnership, and which is very interesting. Now, it is entirely possible that this was something like a Montandon and Company. We do have a lot of these Montandon and Company watches signed Geneva that roughly fit this period. This is during the 1860s period. And in fact, one of these watches was used on an expedition, a geographic expedition. This was quite big thing at the time, but it was a watch, a Montandon and Co. Geneva, and it was a basic watch, but it was what the scientists, explorers were using on this cartographic or exploration mission. And this is very interesting to see that used as a scientific instrument, one of these watches, but we don't know specifically who was behind this partnership or this company, this Montandon and Co. that signed Montandon and Co. Geneva. Now, this is clearly a possible angle of interesting research that should be pursued, but we simply do not know what these watches, how they were labeled. They could have been under the name of Louis Montandon. They could have been any one of a number of different possibilities, but this much is not clear. But now, back to Julien Perret. Now, there are several individuals that are possible for his identity, and one very likely possibility is an individual that originally came from Lassagne, who and this is very close to where Louis Auguste was from, actually. So, but this individual lived between 1823 and 1904 or 06, I have to check, but very interesting. And we do find that there is another individual with whom Julien Perret did form a partnership with, and this also may not have lasted very long. This was in 1852, and this was with an Edward Kestner. And Edward Kestner is a very interesting individual. Now, his biography is noted in a very long article in the Swiss press, which is essentially a necrology. And his dates also are around this period, the 1820s period, was it 1821, I believe, to 1904 or 1906. So he died around the same time as the suspected Julien Perret. But he was a fabricant de horlogerie also. He was originally born in Alsace in France, and then came to Switzerland. Apparently he went to school, I believe it was in the Bern area, and then by 1852 he formed a partnership. And this article in the necrology specifically mentions that he did found a house that became quite successful. And one wonders with whom this partnership was. It the Julien Perret? Was it something that possibly he was involved in that may have been also, could this have been Montandon and Co. with Louis Montandon, Edward Kestner, and Julien Perret? Not exactly clear, but very interesting character, and he apparently was quite involved in founding a watchmaking school and in integrating sort of industrial watchmaking and sales related. He was very hands-on, and he apparently was by the 1870s already teaching as more or less an instructor or professor. And he would later go on to lead. He was quite religious, and he was leading a choir, a religious choir, and he was noted for all of these things. He seems to have been quite an interesting character, and very possible, very likely that Louis Montandon even would have known him. This would have been a small circle in Chaux de Fonds, and these individuals would have been known to each other, certainly. But clearly, Julien Perret was an expert in watch fabrication, and that's probably why he was of interest to Louis Montandon, who also had a background in watch fabrication, but also was a businessman. And He appears to have had a very lucrative setup. He seems to have been quite wealthy. But these are just some interesting facts about this case, about the individuals involved in this case, and I did want to share this because it's just the sort of the sort of background of this period that in history and of watchmaking. That's we're privy to a lot of information about the day-to-day routines, including such legal matters, and we see what was involved in their businesses a little bit, and clearly they had workers and somebody who was doing the ledgers, and clearly there were more people behind this partnership in this business. So there were clearly ouvriers and things as Friday, but all of this comes out in these documents, which is quite fascinating. But this is just a little bit of a note for record, and I wanted to do this legal case because it's a rather nice illustration of some of these backstories behind these watchmakers. So I hope it was enjoyable. I hope some of the AI artwork for this court case came over well. I did think that it did provide somewhat promising ambiance to the storytelling. But thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very nice evening. Goodbye.